Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we are going to talk about high octane mobbing versus Zen mobbing. Austin, I know you are really passionate about this subject, so I'll let you set the stage. I know I've seen both, and there's definitely opportunities for both frustration, confusion, as well as leaning into either of these modes of mobbing. So maybe you can explain the difference between the two, and then what your viewpoint is on it, and we can get into a discussion.
Yeah, so I mean, I think it might fall into kind of like a higher level mob anthropology thing where after being on, I think I've been 4 or 5 different teams in the last 4 to 5 years. And what I've noticed, every time you switch teams, it's often, it's definitely switching people. And then also, doing mob programming in the community, at an event or a conference, and then talking to people about mob programming. I've noticed that there's definitely different styles. And what I'm about to describe to you is definitely a spectrum. And I'm going to describe 2 extreme ends of one particular pendulum. And that is, I've heard people refer to like the high octane, or like supporting getting work done. And I guess I can give like a concrete example of it, is kind of give them more feel of it, is, you're in a mob programming session. Let's say there's 4 people in it, and everyone's trying to solve the same problem. But there might be multiple experiments going on, right? So it seems to be the chief goal is to solve the problem, right? And achieve whatever, big thing is in the way of the mob moving forward, right? And so you'll have one person researching, you might have another person running an experiment on their computer, you might have a driver navigator trying to experiment on the mob station. And it's basically like everyone is throwing their best ideas at it. And it's not like there's no concern for learning. It's just everyone is focused on solving the problem at hand, and just giving it the best that they got. And so it's almost like optimizing for problem solving as the top goal, I suppose, right? And so that's kind of on one end of the spectrum. So I like to call it high octane, because you're basically just like kicking it into gear. And, and I've seen mobs, some people like to work this way. And also I've seen that almost any mob will kick into this gear in a quote unquote crisis, right? Where something has to get solved right away. And then there's this other end of the spectrum, and I'm going to exaggerate, of course, because there's obviously things in between, but it's very Zen. So everything is very controlled. Everything is going very slow and methodical. There's usually someone facilitating. And typically the goal, from what I've noticed in this style of mobbing, is learning and or everyone being in sync and no one being left behind, right? And so, idea will be put on the board for all to see. No action is taken until there's consensus. And then the action is taken on this. And at every step of the way, it's asked, do we understand what's going on? Can we take the next step? Do we understand what's going on? Can we take the next step? If anybody starts experimenting and saying a lot of ideas that might be leaving others behind, someone stops the line and says, okay, let's make sure we all understand. And so I think its goal is different in that it's trying to keep everyone in sync and have high amounts of learning. And I think at the very least, we can probably have all our preferences or opinions of when to use them and when to not. It's very good to be aware that there's these 2 different styles, and that when you enter a mob, to know what you're entering into. And so those are my first thoughts on the kind of the spectrum. Chris, do you have any reactions to that?
Oh yeah, it's funny because I think I just recently had a kind of a shift. Like, I think before I liked a lot of high octane mobbing, like personally, and then like I think more recently in my mobbing, I find that high octane also gives opportunities to expose maybe a pattern of learning opportunities within the team that then can be reviewed afterwards. So like I was recently on a mob, and it was like, okay, high octane mobbing, there's like a problem that needs to be solved. Let's just jam through it. And then it's like, as you're navigating because you're still navigating and driving in a high octane mob, like from what I see, right? But you might have like code on another monitor where you're running it locally, but on the shared computer, you're moving it forward as fast as you can. And so you go high octane, and then what I saw was like, oh, I was just taking note, like this navigation, this high level navigation wasn't understood and had to go lower level. And typically that's a really good thing to watch out for. And just like in red green refactor, right, we don't refactor when we're red. It's almost like Zen mobbing is the refactor step in red green refactor if you're doing high octane Zen, high octane Zen, high octane Zen, because then you get this like nice little set of, we blasted through the problem, the product owner has something to look at and review, and as we're going in through refactoring steps, it's like, okay, like we need learning sessions around these items because these navigations weren't quite understood, and so on. So like that's kind of like my immediate reaction to how you described that, because I have found that like now it'll be a lot of, if I find myself joining a mob and they're just like, we really need to get through this, and we just navigate it, and like somebody might be kind of maybe navigating more than to spread out the equality of navigation. Once that commit has been pushed and it's going through the pipeline to production or whatever, and you're talking more about maybe like all of the meta interactions that happens, to the point where it's like, why was that high octane? Like why wasn't this kind of like more of what learnings did we have while doing that, and reflecting on it? So I feel like actually alternating between the two is actually very healthy. So yeah, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think if I'm not thinking about it, I think my flow is exactly what you said, where high octane, and then we have like this victory moment, and then we go Zen to learn from what just happened, right? And then and so it's this flow back and forth. And I think there's not necessarily anything good or bad about either style, but what I have noticed is that some people have really strong preferences, and so high octane I've seen. So the one experience I had was I was in a mob that would flow back and forth between high octane and Zen. And I think I came into a mob that favored much more stronger on the Zen side. And so anytime I would naturally, without thinking about it, kick into high octane, it was causing confusion in the mob because it wasn't how they normally operated. And so I think it's good to have awareness of it, very least, and maybe bring it up as a retrospective, something to talk about, to find out. And I think it's like anything else: experiment, inspect, adapt, find out what works in your context. I mean, there are benefits. I think my natural flow is to go back and forth between the two. And I imagine a scenario where you're always in high octane. You get a lot done, but you probably be leaving people in the dust if you go there too long, right? Where they don't really understand what's going on because they maybe contributed 1/3 of an idea, and then someone else took 5 other ideas, put them together, and took across the finish line, and then they're on to the next thing, right? And then it's like, whoa,
like,
what just yeah,
Lord of the Flies mobbing, where it's
yeah,
like, just trying to go. It's I think that if you had really like just super senior people, like you could do that, right? It would be kind of like a professional team, basically working together, and if you had the best of the best kind of all in the same place, right? But you wouldn't do that if the skill levels were widely varying, without really sacrificing the knowledge and ostracizing in a way the people kind of in the other space. And so, but sometimes you also just need to show what good looks like, because some people are in the space where they just don't know, like, what does it look like how would we have gotten from point A to point B? I have no idea what you're describing now. I see this most often with the implementation of a strategy pattern to reduce cyclomatic complexity. It's like it's like, okay, you have all these if statements everywhere, and we're gonna make a factory and put in a strategy, and like that'll be the high level navigation. And you like in the mob, you just get crickets, right? And like that's okay, because everybody's kind of at a different stage in their learning journey. And now, if everybody knew that terminology and was like, boom, I know it exactly what you're talking about. Somebody else navigates it, passes navigation to somebody else. Like that's the, that might be the high octane all the time team, right? Like that, everybody knows, at least roughly all of the design patterns and the tricks in the language, and you're not really, you're talking at a very, very high level. I think you could keep that high octane all the time. But, and then also I think that for people really new, early in their career, you could be Zen all the time, right? Like, and so especially if there's not a senior in there, it's like, okay, what's our method? What did we retrospect on? Let's be super methodical, step by step. Like, we're going to write a test, we're going to watch it fail, we're going to make it pass, we're going to refactor, we're going to deploy, all this other stuff. And so yeah, I totally agree. Like it's I think you can do both, but as maybe the thought that I'm trying to say here is like, if you have a gradient of skill levels, if you have like an associate, a mid, a senior, and a principal engineer all sitting together, then that upshift, downshift sort of thing could really help, because it's like, okay, here's what good looks like. Now let's talk about what we just experienced together.
And I think I could definitely see those being major factors. And I think another major factor too is personality, because I've even seen it where we had a mix of experience levels and skill levels, but the personalities and the preferences in the team tended to lean higher on the high octane for this one team I'm thinking of. And so for example, if someone's preferred learning style is immersion as opposed to slowing everything down so I can understand it step by step, is like, I didn't quite understand that what happened there, but let's go through it 4 more times the next couple of days as we solve problems, and I'll pick it up, and so what I saw there was it led to maybe kind of a rowdy mob in a fun way, where high amounts of like candor and disagreement, but in a fun way, and try this idea. Oh, it worked. Okay, let's use it. And it was, that kind of style thing. So even though there were different levels of roles, they preferred to learn that way as opposed to slowing everything down. And there was less concern for consensus. It was more like, well, let's just try it. Let's just do that. Let's just try that. Oh, you have an idea? Let's try that. And what I've seen with Zen mobbing is that it's less prone to action and more to consensus, and making sure everyone is heard first before action is taken. And I can see the benefit of both. I can think of contexts where the risk of someone not feeling heard is a big deal, right? Personality preferences or otherwise. So you would really want to make sure that everyone feels heard before an idea is tried, right? And in other contexts, you just keep trying ideas and everyone's throwing ideas and they happen.
Well, and I think that the heuristic of everyone should be speaking a roughly equal amount of time is true in both contexts.
Right.
So, if you are in high octane mobbing mode and only one person is speaking, like that's probably an anti-pattern, right?
Right.
And so, and I think that's kind of where it delineates. Like, so you can ramp up or ramp down in both, and Zen, I think, can be likened to a state of flow, and your flow might just be really high, even though you're being Zen, right? About it, because you're just being super methodical, checking in with everyone all the time, and as long as that's kind of like not happening in fits and starts, it can feel really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I just think, like, it does boil down to like kindness, consideration, and respect, and everyone speaking a roughly equal amount of time. So 4 people, 25% of the time they've spoken throughout the day, the week, or whatever. Larger refactorings might get navigated over a day even, before people realize the benefit. And so it's like, okay, now that we've seen that, like, how do we navigate more of that? And I especially like going into legacy systems with like huge switch statements, because that, and especially if that switch statement's repeated, like that's a great opportunity to like do just like one switch statement and refactor out a couple instances, and then be like, okay, now everybody else navigate that.
Nice.
So I think there's some opportunity as well to do both in those scenarios.
Yeah, and I think before we close, I'll just share some from being the anthropologist and being in the different teams and mobs, some practical tips I've picked up. So for one is, if you're in High Octane, for me, for my personality type, it was basically just like, you have an idea, try it, but then make sure you queue other ideas behind yours, right? So that equality happens, right? And then, but it's basically, just do it, so to speak, but ensure equality. And then when you're in Zen mode, what I've noticed is I use a lot of sticky notes because I just don't blurt out ideas, right? Or I just don't add them to the common Kanban board, because ideas want to be discussed more. And so if you find yourself in a mob where they strongly prefer Zen, and you have a lot of ideas and things running through your head, and you just don't want to blurt them out at them and disrupt the Zen, is keep a lot of notes, and then you wait for the appropriate time to be like, oh, I have an idea. Would you guys like to discuss it now or later? And then that way ideas enter the mob in a very methodical and synchronized way, as opposed to, oh, where did this task come from? Someone edited the board and just added it, kind of thing. And so, and then doing my research and having lots of things that I have on the side that are queued up ready for the right situation, as opposed to just whenever they occur to me.
So some advice I gave while doing red-green refactor in the past was like, the code would be red, or the test would be red, and there was changes happening, and it's like, oh, we should rename that. Oh, we should write we should delete that comment. Oh, we should do this, move that up here, down there. Yeah. It's like, that's refactoring, and we're not green. Like, yes. And it's the same sort of thing, right? It's like, and there's benefits to both, but that's why I think like the red-green refactor is very methodical. It's very Zen, and can be helpful when thinking about this context. So
absolutely.
All right. So thank you everybody for watching. If you agree or disagree with any of this, please leave comments on YouTube or any comment available places like Twitter and LinkedIn. And share this with anybody who is maybe going through their mobbing journey and kind of experiencing any sort of dissonance. I think this episode can be really helpful with that. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell and all that, and we will see you all next time. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.